Live from the Ed McMahon Mass Communications Center at Quinnipiac University, this is QNN, the Quinnipiac News Network.
Good evening and welcome to QNN. I'm Sammy Moore.
And I'm Matt Morris.
Don't share hats and keep your hair up because Maine campus has a lice outbreak.
QNN's Matt McAdam went out to investigate which residence halls have lice and how you can avoid it.
Keep your hats to yourself. QU has lice. The lice outbreak might have some people worried, but these few simple steps can keep them off your mind and out of your hair. Matt McAdam, QNN.
Quinnipiac University is stopping yet another fraternity from having activities on campus because of hazing accusations. Beta Theta Pi denies this charge, though. The group says it was the type of activity that, quote, builds communication and leadership. This is the fourth Greek organization to get a cease and desist order in 3 years.
A non-profit group of sexual assault victims came to Quinnipiac on Tuesday to discuss attacks on college campuses. The group from New Haven, known as Jane Doe No More, also spoke about what students can do as bystanders. The group held a Q&A at the end. All donations will be used to fund Jane Doe's many programs. Thinking about working overseas? Quinnipiac alumnus Dave Hartman came to campus on Monday to tell students about his experience with an international group called Save the Children. Hartman had worked in Iraqi Kurdistan. He worked recently at Liberia in the height of the country's Ebola crisis in 2014.
I don't know about you, Sammy, but I know I don't like the walk from Hogan Road, and it turns out a lot of other students don't like it either.
Tiffany Mutt went out to find why students choose to search for a spot in North Lot instead of walking from Hogan Road.
Like, it's really bad, super crowded.
It's honestly awful.
Grasso says they are open for suggestions on how to make parking at Quinnipiac easier for everyone. With QNN, Tiffany Mutt.
The Asian Student Alliance hosted a traditional Chinese meal on Saturday. Students were invited to experience dim sum, a Chinese cuisine prepared in bite-sized portions. A traditional dim sum brunch includes many types of steamed buns, such as dumplings and rice noodles. And Ireland's Great Hunger Museum is holding a food drive November 1st through the 14th. All donations brought to the museum will benefit the Connecticut Food Bank. The museum is asking for only non-perishable food items. Some of the items needed most are fruit juice, canned vegetables and fruit, soups, and peanut butter. The museum donated 281 pounds of food to the Connecticut Food Bank last year.
And food trucks crowded the quad on Wednesday in honor of United Way Food Truck Day. This supported the 2015 United Way campaign of Greater New Haven. Students could come enjoy food from a grilled cheese truck, cupcake truck, ice cream truck, taco truck, and a hot dog truck. United Way helps promote communities coming together for charity. And find out who's leading the GOP presidential polls.
Plus, for one Uber driver, a typical pickup turned dangerous.
Larry Legrano has all this and more for your national news.
Thanks, guys. Well, the Taco Bell employee that assaulted an Uber driver is out of a job. The former Taco Bell marketing manager is now being charged on 4 different accounts after assaulting an Uber driver earlier this week. The Uber driver decided to kick Benjamin Golden out of his car after telling him he was too drunk to give directions. Golden responded by hitting the driver and slamming his head against the window. He has issued an apology. And according to the latest Fox News survey on the GOP presidential field, almost half of the people polled either support candidates Donald Trump or Ben Carson. The 2 Republican candidates hold a steady lead in the race. Trump earned 26% of the support, while Ben Carson was right behind him, earning 23%. Senators Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz both followed with 11%. And speaking of Republican candidates, BuzzFeed resurfaced a video of Ben Carson's college commencement speech at Andrews University. The video showed him saying his personal belief is that Egyptian pyramids were used to store grain. Carson has taken a little heat for this. He has since defended his stance, saying the sealed compartments in the pyramids can be used to preserve grain for a long time. Well, I certainly don't remember learning that in education. Back to the desk. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Larry, and I agree. I don't remember ever learning about the grains in my history textbook.
No, maybe it was the Illuminati or something. When we come back, Stacey Pierre-Louis has tips on how you can reduce your stress as the holiday season gets closer.
Plus, the inspirational story of a quadriplegic who made history and came to campus. We'll be right back.
Quinnipiac University freshman Annie Ishfaq wears a hijab, a headscarf worn by many Muslim American women. During her middle school years, her classmates started treating her differently because of this custom and her faith.
In 7th grade, I remember being asked, are you Osama bin Laden's daughter? And I was really shocked. I'm like, are you serious? I'm not his relative. I'm not anything related to him.
Ishfaq isn't the only one who's gone through something like this. A poll by Gallup found 48% of Muslim Americans say they've experienced racial or religious discrimination. Jason Seacat is a psychology professor at Western New England University. He says our brains are programmed to discriminate.
Human beings like to take mental shortcuts. We like to be able to make quick decisions about people, to know where we stand in everyday life.
Seacat says it's easier for people to make mental shortcuts about Muslims when events like the Paris terrorist attacks are fresh in everyone's minds. Despite this recent tragedy, Ishfaq says things have gotten better for her since she's come to college. She says the Quinnipiac community is more accepting and mature.
There are some people who still think that, who still think negatively of Muslims, but there are most people who don't.
But QU's Catholic priest wants to do more. Jordan Lanigan will host an event next semester to teach students about different faiths and help them meet different people.
When you have that, it's much more difficult to then speak of a billion people as a they and put a single, they're all like this kind of a statement.
Seacat said we can help stop discrimination by speaking out when we hear hurtful remarks. That and educating our peers will make a difference. Neliana Ferraro, Q30 News. On a Thursday at 8 a.m., Quinnipiac professor Bill Buick decided to discuss a topic that's been all over the news recently: school shootings.
I think what we're seeing is tragic. I don't think it's going to end today. We're going to continue to see gun violence.
If that's the case, is there a way to find potential shooters before they strike? Many people think of shooters as loners playing video games. That's not necessarily true. The Secret Service and the U.S. Department of Education teamed up to learn more about the traits of school shooters. Out of the cases researchers looked at from 1974 to 2000, only 35% of them were described as loners. 15% of the shooters showed some interest in violent video games. Buick disagrees with this study. He says people can tell when someone could become a threat.
I think the majority of students would say that person is just different, that person is giving me a very bad vibe, but I'm going to stiff arm them. I'm going to keep them out of my zone.
Officer David Hartman is the spokesperson for the New Haven Police Department. He agrees people can sense when someone is a bit off.
To perpetrate a crime like this, you have to have an inherent creepiness. You have to have an instability somewhere.
But creepiness isn't enough to categorize people. It also doesn't give police enough reasonable suspicion to arrest someone. So are video games the telling sign of a potential shooter? Hartman thinks it might be something other than gaming.
So if your crappy parenting is that you don't want to pay attention to your child, and therefore they're sitting down on their bed playing a violent video game all day, I don't think it's the video game, I think it's the neglect.
But Professor Buick says violent games are definitely a factor. Kids are able to learn gun and ammunition types at a young age, and he says video games desensitizes them to violence. Whether or not a shooter is actually apprehended beforehand based on these profiles, Officer Hartman has some suggestions in case you do find yourself in a situation like that.
You do not shelter in place when something happens. You run like hell. And if you can't run, you hide. And if you can't hide, you fight.
Neliana Ferraro, QNN. Meet Louise De Venero. She has lived at Atria Larson Place, a senior living home, for 2 years. 35 years ago, she was a smoker. Back then, smoking was an activity De Venero could do with her friends.
We would go out to a club or something, and we thought we were all it with the cigarette and a cocktail.
Jill Mozaika is a nurse at Atria. She smoked for 12 years before leaving cigarettes behind for good. But what made these two quit? Some lawmakers would like to believe it's the increase in cigarette taxes over the years. A study published in Health Economics says otherwise. The study found a $1 increase in taxes decreased cigarettes smoked per day by only about 4 to 5% for people over 50 years old. The researchers explained addiction is so strong that it doesn't have much of an impact on older smokers. Instead of quitting, seniors would rather spend money on their cigarettes instead of food or housing. Brett Gerstenhaber is a pulmonologist in Hamden, Connecticut. He says there are many different reasons people quit smoking. Some quit because they've been diagnosed with lung cancer, while others are just sick of having side effects like phlegm. But Gerstenhaber thinks that a $1 increase in the cigarette tax just isn't enough to actually have an effect on adult smoking habits.
We're nickeling and diming our way up the tax ladder. And I think somebody should just bite the bullet and say, here's a $10 tax, and put it out there.
He said taxes come the closest to being the umbrella solution for deterring all age groups from the habit. Mosaica doesn't think cigarette taxes play a role in the choice.
So nobody cares. If they want to smoke, they're going to smoke. It's like buying any sort of drug.
For Mosaica, it was a friend's insistence that finally convinced her to stop. De Veniero stopped smoking soon after her mother died.
I said to myself, you know, Louise, you are going to stop smoking. And I gave it up just like that.
And as Gerstenhaber said, supportive family and friends may be the key to kicking the habit. Neliana Ferraro, QNN. Assistant Professor Nathaniel Hendren wanted to find out how moving to different neighborhoods affects children. He looked at 5 million movers across the United States and calculated their predicted future income changes. What he found has confirmed what economists have theorized for a long time. Parents who want better education for their children move to regions with more tax funds dedicated to learning. Based on our calculations using Hendren's data, kids living in neighborhoods with high crime rates, segregation, and low marriage rates don't do as well. Living in New Haven for 20 years would take an estimated average of 8.36% off of a child's future expected income. Move 45 minutes north to Hartford, and living there will give a child a 2.58% increase. The study shows even worse outcomes when you take a look at the boys. Hendren estimated boys living in New Haven for 20 years would see a 14.96% decrease in their expected future income. Hartford boys would see a 4.98% increase. Quinnipiac professor and economist Don Johnson says these issues are more complex than people may think.
Certainly they can't be solved as simply as saying, well, just move everybody. I'm sorry, but you really need to improve all the schools instead of saying, well, just move everybody to the good ones where they don't fit because there isn't enough room for them.
Steve Driffin is one of the people trying to find a solution. He works for the Connecticut Center for Arts and Technology. As programming director, Driffin coordinates with Lincoln Bassett in New Haven to make after-school programs. Kids there can pick up an instrument, play rugby, and learn how to paint.
I'm not trying to create, musicians or artists or anything like that, but hopefully through this they can get the notion and idea that I could do anything.
Driffin has already started to see changes in some of the students who have histories of behavioral problems. He hopes new initiatives like their reading program will help students even more in the upcoming year and for the rest of their lives. Neliana Ferraro, QNN.